This video tutorial is going to walk you through the process of making a reduction block print. So let's get into it. So here is the source image that I chose to work from. This is Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead. And I tried to choose a picture that had some good darks and lights in it, and it was clear. And I printed the photo out so that it was easier to see as I was working. Then what I did is I took a marker and I outlined some of the big areas of light and shadow and color so they were easier to make out. That's going to be important when I go to start carving and deciding on the different blocks of color for my image. And I also planned out what colors I was going to use. The source image itself had a lot of browns in it, so that was kind of like my base color. And then I decided that silver and white were going to be my lighter colors, and black was going to be my shadow color. I had originally planned having some red accents, but at the end, you'll see I decided against having the red. So I worked with basically 4 colors, including the white of the paper. So white, silver, brown, and black in order from lightest to darkest. So the next thing that I did was I wanted to make a sketch working from my photo. So I just traced around the size of the block that I was going to use for the block print. Sometimes when you're working on this, your teacher might have a template that's already pre-sized for you, but you want your sketch to be the same size as the block. I drew this freehand, but if you would like, if you have a photo that's the right size, then you can just trace your photo. That is an option too. Maybe use a light table or something like that. But you do want your sketch to be the same size as your block, because just like when you're doing regular block printing, we're going to end up flipping this over and burnishing it on the back so that our graphite transfers onto our block. So just like with regular block printing. So I kind of cleaned up the lines and I traced over the outlines with ebony pencil. That's a nice soft lead graphite, so that's going to transfer well. And I also cut my sketch out at this point, so when I flip it over on the block, I know that I'm putting it in the right spot. So here is my sketch upside down. You can't see the ebony pencil because it's on the top of the linoleum block. Well, you can't see the linoleum block either because it's hidden by the paper. But this here is my upside down sketch, and there's the linoleum block on top of it. You can tape it down so it doesn't wiggle, and then use something like the back edge of a marker or the back edge of a lino cutter or a bone folder, and you want to press down on the back and it pushes that graphite onto the surface of your linoleum block. It's called burnishing. Remember that the linoleum blocks have that talc powder that is on them when they come in the package. So you want to take a damp paper towel and wipe that talc off and dry it off. It will be a little bit sticky, and that is how you know that the graphite will transfer well. So far everything is the same as regular block printing. Now it's going to start to change as we get into reduction printing. So here's how the sketch transferred onto the linoleum block. It was still a little bit fuzzy, so I didn't get a super good transfer, but there was enough there to see. And I was able to use a Sharpie marker and clean up the lines and draw right onto the block so that I could see my lines better when I go to carve. Okay, so now I'm going back to my original sketch and I'm going to add in, just for myself, this doesn't have to be super neat, this is just a color plan for myself. So I took some crayons to do this. You could do it with color pencil, marker, you could even just write this shape is going to be brown, or whatever it is. But I'm going back into my original sketch and deciding what I want to be what color. This may not seem like a really important step, but it actually is pretty important because as you are carving and printing, it can get confusing in terms of what you're supposed to carve when. So this is going to be important. So I colored my sketch, and this part, if you're coloring it in, especially with like crayon or something like that, that's going to cover over your ebony pencil outlines, you want to do the transferring of the sketch onto the block before you color in your sketch, because you don't want like the crayon wax to go over the ebony pencil, because then it won't transfer onto the linoleum block properly. So the transferring of the outline sketch comes first, and then you go back into the sketch second and color in the shapes. Okay, so now it's time to carve. So with reduction printing, it's not like with regular block printing where you do your carves and then you print it and then you're done. What you're doing is you're doing multiple steps of carving and printing, and you're actually printing on top of the last color that you just printed. So you're like basically shrinking the block down each time you carve, and that's going to allow the whatever color was underneath to show through. So there are multiple layers of different colors on your print, okay? And the rule is you carve whatever color you just printed, okay? It's a little bit confusing. It's a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but when you see it, I think it will make more sense. So my first color is going to be white, but it's not like inked white, like the white is the white of the paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve all the shapes that I want to be white. Now, I was getting confused even with my colored sketch nearby because the block is flipped, so it was hard to wrap my head around where do I need to carve. So what I did was I looked at the white shapes on the sketch, and then I just went right back onto my block and I made kind of these little like hash marks just so I would know for myself, okay, that's what I want to carve. So if you do that to make it easier for yourself to remember, that's something that can be helpful. I found that really helpful for me. Okay, so here's what the block looks like with what is going to be white carved out. Just remember what you know about using the lino cutter and thinking about the direction of your carves and, you know, how much pressure to put on there and things like that. So those other things that you know from block printing still apply here. Okay, so now I am going to ink and print my first color. Well, really, it's kind of the second color because the white of the paper is kind of like my first color, but I'm ready to ink my first inked color, which is going to be silver. When we do reduction printing, we want to do the color layers in order from dark to light. So I'm going to do silver, then brown, then black, because it goes in light to dark order. Okay. So the other thing is you want to pull more than one print. I recommend at least 3, because if one gets messed up as you're carving and shrinking the block, you can't go back and reverse this. So you want to have more prints to work with in case one doesn't go as you had planned or it gets messed up. You want to have extra. So I say always at least 3. So my first color here is silver. So I pulled 3 silver prints, and you can see the shapes that I just inked. Of course, they're showing up as white right now because I took that part off the block. So that's what is showing up as white. So I washed my materials, I washed my block, I dried my block, I set my prints off to the side to dry. Now I'm going to carve my next color. So now remember, I just printed silver. So when you go to do your next round of carving, you're going to carve the areas of the color that you just printed. So now anything that I want to be silver, that's what I'm going to carve this time around. So again, it doesn't show in this photo, but I did make some little marks on my block so I would know what shapes I wanted to be silver. And you can actually, like, you don't have to like stay right within the shape if you don't want to. I actually extended my carves a little bit over the original lines. That's going to create almost a transition or a blending effect. So if you kind of want it to look like that, that's an option, or you can leave it hard edge as well. It's just kind of like a stylistic thing. So now I'm going to print right on top of my silver print, but I've shrunk the block down now, so the parts of the silver that I just carved, that's what's going to show through. So brown is my next color. We didn't have brown ink. I had to mix it. I mixed red, orange, and turquoise, and I made a new color of ink. The other thing about reduction printing is, since you're printing multiple layers of ink on top of one another, the ink kind of gets thick sometimes. So it might not be a bad idea to mix a little bit of water in with it to kind of make the consistency a little bit nicer. I found that that was a helpful thing to do. That was what the colors looked like before I mixed them, and that was the brown that I got. Okay, so then I rolled the brown ink onto the block that I just carved for the second time. And now we're printing the brown with more carved out of it, but we're printing it right on top of this silver image. The tricky part about this is making sure we want this block to sit right on top of the same spot of where the first run of the print was. So that's called getting it registered. My trick for getting it registered is I'm gonna have this edge meet up against this edge and hold it at like a 90-degree angle. So I like to try to kind of find some feature that matches up, so that, you know, his forehead matches up here. This is of course upside down, because when it lays down, it's gonna go the other way as it folds over. So I'm gonna hold this block up to this edge, carefully bring it towards me and fold it down. Then I give it a tap, and I flip it over, because I like the paper to be on top of the inked block when I'm using the Baron to press down. So that's the best way that I found to get it registered. There's all these things, contraptions you can make with like little registration lines and like all these things, but frankly, I think keep it simple. This works for me. All right, so now you can see the brown has been printed right on top of the silver, but I carved more away the second time around. So whatever I carved the second time around, that shows up as silver. And it got pretty well registered. It's a little bit off, but you know what? If it's a little off, it's not the end of the world. So again, I do this 3 times, because in case one gets messed up, I want to have extra to work with. So here are 3 printed with the silver and the brown on top of it. So once again, I'm going to wash my block off, wash my supplies, let my prints dry. And now it's time to carve. Again, this is going to be my final run here. So I just printed brown. So now I'm going to carve everything out that is going to be brown. So at this point, there wasn't a whole lot left on the block. So a lot of this ended up going to be brown. And there's no photo of it. I forgot to take a picture, but I inked the final color at this point, which is black. In this image here, it shows you a little bit better what I was talking about how to get it registered. So here's my 3rd round of carving, and it's inked in black. And see how I line up the edge of the block at a 90-degree angle, and I just, if you're very careful, lay it down. It takes a little practice and a little knack, but it's not too hard to do. And then, like I said, I kind of sandwich them together, flip it upside down, and push the Baron on the back part. So here's how it looked with the 3rd color printed, with the black printed on the top. And there's how all 3 came out. They're all slightly different, just in terms of like the saturation of the ink or the pressure or whatever it was. So they all come out a little different, even though it's printmaking from the same block. So this was the one that I liked the best. I signed it. I think it came out pretty well. So my overall thoughts, I enjoyed the process and I was happy with how it came out. I liked the colors that I chose because they matched the vibe of the Walking Dead show. I liked how I didn't keep my shapes flat, but I did try to break them up a little bit with the different textures and things. The images were pretty well registered and it was a tiny bit off, but I think that kind of adds to the effect. It makes it look like a block print. These are handmade, so they're going to be a little bit off, and that's what makes them special. The printing wasn't perfect, but the grittiness and distortion I think actually kind of worked for the image and for this character. And, with printmaking and block printing in particular, you're going to get some unique, unexpected results from the process. So try to enjoy the process. There was a couple things I did wish, though, that I did differently. And I wish I hadn't left so few areas that were solid black. I felt like having bigger black shapes and more black shapes would have kind of made the image pop a little bit more. But I got a little overzealous towards the end, and I think I just carved so much away. So that was one thing that I would reconsider if I did this again. There was also a couple minor details that didn't really read as clearly as I wanted. But it read clearly. I feel it gets the job done. So here are my tips to you as you decide what you want to do for your reduction print. I would say, first of all, keep your design pretty simple. As you know from block printing with just one color, it's hard enough to print lots of details just with one, let alone when you're trying to do multiple colors and get it registered each time. So keep it simple, okay? Second, trust the process. It will look cool even if it's not perfect. You're probably not going to get a perfect registration every time, and that's okay. And, sometimes that actually is like a happy accident. It does create a cool effect. Definitely pull multiple prints, because if you mess up, you can't put back what you've already carved out. So more is always better. You can always give them away to your friends and things if you have extra. And don't be afraid to experiment with colors of ink and colors of paper. I used white paper, but certainly you can experiment. And then my last thing, it's hidden by the little icons here, but I did say have fun. It's a new process. This is an elective class. I want you to try something new, and I want you to have fun with it and just kind of see what happens. All right, so that shows you and hopefully gives you a better idea of how I created a reduction print, and I can't wait to see what you do and what you come up with yours. Thank you for listening.